It was supposed to be a routine renovation, nothing more than replacing floorboards and updating the plumbing in an old farmhouse just outside the Bavarian village of Königstal. The structure itself was ancient, with moss-covered stone walls and a sagging roof that hadn't seen a proper repair since the 1952. But when the workers pulled down a crumbling section of plaster on the north-facing wall of the basement, their hammers struck something hollow. The sound echoed strangely, not like stone or concrete. Curious, they cleared more debris. Then they found it a thin wooden panel sealed behind crumbling bricks. A false wall. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever looked behind it. When they finally broke through, what they uncovered didn't make sense. A narrow doorway opened into a hidden chamber no bigger than a walk-in closet. Dust particles floated through the air like ash in a still sky. On the floor, a tattered wool rug covered hand-cut stone. A rusted iron cot sat in the corner, its mattress sagging and brittle. On the desk, a gas lamp, 2 rusted Luger pistols, a yellowing stack of wartime newspapers, and pinned to the wall a series of maps, hand-marked with ink in fading red and black. But the most disturbing object sat directly beneath the desk lamp, a folded uniform almost untouched by time. Black wool, red piping, iron cross on the breast, and sewn onto the collar 2 silver oak leaves, the unmistakable insignia of a Nazi general. The foreman called the police, who sealed off the building within hours. Soon after, historians arrived, followed by forensics, journalists, and a swarm of unmarked cars. No one could explain it. The room hadn't just been hidden, it had been preserved. Food tins lined the shelves. A half-smoked cigarette lay in a glass ashtray. The dust had settled on top of everything, undisturbed for decades. Someone had lived in this space. Someone had intended to come back, but they never did. And judging by the condition of what was found, this wasn't a soldier hiding from capture. This was a man who had slipped into history, vanishing without a sound until now. In the final chaotic days of World War II, as Berlin crumbled and the Third Reich collapsed under the weight of Allied firepower, General Otto Weber disappeared. Not died, not captured, not confirmed dead. Just gone. His last verified appearance was on April 26, 1945, when an intelligence report placed him fleeing a government building in central Berlin, wearing civilian clothes and escorted by 2 men believed to be SS. He was carrying a satchel, and then nothing. Not a single sighting, no body, no records, only whispers. Weber wasn't just another Nazi officer. He was the architect of several high-level military strategies during the Eastern Front campaign and had close ties to Heinrich Himmler himself. Fluent in 4 languages, with a background in engineering and logistics, Weber wasn't the kind of man to vanish by accident. His disappearance sparked international speculation that spanned decades. Some said he fled to Argentina with the help of Vatican-run escape routes. Others believed he was killed by Soviet troops during the siege of Berlin, his body lost in the rubble. Conspiracy theorists claimed he orchestrated his own death to escape justice. Burned remains substituted for his own. False documents planted, witnesses silenced. The Nuremberg trials never mentioned him. He wasn't among the dead or the captured. Post-war intelligence agencies from the U.S., Britain, and even Israel's Mossad kept his file open. By the 1962, Weber had become legend, a ghost general whose absence spoke louder than any verdict. Some believed he lived under an assumed identity, quietly aging in the shadows of post-war Europe. Others thought he'd died long ago, buried under an alias in some forgotten graveyard. But none of those theories had proof. Not until the discovery behind that false wall in Königstal. Now, with the room preserved like a time capsule, the old rumors are stirring again. Was this where Weber went? Did he hide here in silence while the world hunted him? And if so, who helped him? Because a general doesn't vanish alone. He has help, allies, sympathizers, and a plan. Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear: someone went to great lengths to keep Otto Weber's story buried. But after 80 years, the walls have finally cracked open, and the past is clawing its way out. April 1945. Germany was burning. Cities lay in ruins. Trains stopped running. Communications faltered. The Third Reich was in its death throes, and those who had built it were now desperately trying to outrun the reckoning that was closing in from every direction. American forces were advancing from the west, the Soviets from the east. Entire divisions surrendered without a fight. Others melted into the forests, hoping anonymity might succeed where loyalty had failed. The Nazi command structure was collapsing. Hitler had retreated to his bunker. Goebbels was dictating propaganda no one would hear. And in the middle of this chaos, a secret plan was unfolding. One meant not just to end a war, but to sever its head. The plan was called Operation Eclipse. Drafted in the shadows of Allied intelligence, it was designed to do more than win on the battlefield. It aimed to decapitate the Nazi regime, capture or kill its leaders, seize archives, interrogate scientists, prevent the rise of a Fourth Reich. Military units were given lists, blacklists of high-value individuals to arrest on sight: SS officers, Gestapo leaders, party ideologues. And somewhere on that list, buried among names like Bormann, Müller, and Dönitz, was General Otto Weber. Weber was a problem. His rank alone demanded attention, but his connections were what made him dangerous. He had been present at several strategic meetings on the Eastern Front and rumored to have knowledge of experimental weapons research taking place in the Harz Mountains. Files recovered post-war suggested he may have been involved in the transportation of looted art and gold from occupied France. The Allies wanted him. The Soviets wanted him more. But Weber, ever the tactician, had been preparing for this moment long before the first shell hit Berlin. As the city descended into chaos, he slipped through the cracks, shaving his mustache, burning documents, using names no one would remember. He knew how the net would tighten, where checkpoints would form, which routes were watched, and like others who had disappeared before him, Weber seemed to vanish into smoke. But he didn't go far. He didn't board a U-boat to Argentina or vanish into the Siberian tundra. He went somewhere quiet, remote, a place no one would think to look, not to escape the war, but to wait for the world to forget it. Königstal doesn't appear on most modern maps. Even locals joke that the village is more myth than municipality. Tucked deep into the Bavarian Alps, surrounded by pine-covered ridges and cloud-kissed peaks, it's the kind of place where time lingers. There's no gas station, no post office, just a stone chapel, a shuttered inn, and homes that look carved from another century. Population 287, maybe less. In Königstal, news arrives late and leaves early. That's how the villagers like it. So when the false wall was discovered in a farmhouse on the southern edge of town, most residents didn't say much. But a few, the oldest among them, remembered. Quietly, hesitantly. Their stories were all the same. Strange cars during the war, blacked-out windows, unfamiliar men in long coats, vehicles arriving at night and leaving before dawn. One woman, now in her 90s, recalled being told by her father never to look toward the orchard after dark. "It wasn't for us," she whispered. The road belonged to someone else then. During the final months of the war, the mountains around Königstal saw almost no fighting. That was by design. German officers had marked the region as operationally quiet, a perfect place for last stands, final orders, or disappearances. Records from a 1943 Wehrmacht logistics report mentioned Königstal briefly as a winter resupply route. But beyond that, the village is a blank spot in official history. No battles, no deployments, no aftermath. Just silence. The farmhouse where the hidden room was found had belonged to the same family for over a century. Official documents show it changed hands once briefly in early 1945 when it was leased to a man whose name has since vanished from local registries. After the war, ownership returned with no explanation, no investigation, no questions asked, just a signature and a date. The villagers accepted it, because in Königstall, things were rarely explained. They just were. And now, decades later, the truth was bleeding through the cracks. The wall was never meant to be found. But time has a way of peeling back even the most carefully buried secrets. And in this quiet alpine village, something long hidden had finally surfaced. The past had returned, not as memory, but as evidence. When the forensic team finally stepped inside the hidden chamber, they did so with the slow, deliberate movements of people entering a tomb. The air was stale, tinged with the faint scent of mold and cold iron. Every object felt suspended in time, untouched since the day its owner vanished. Floodlights illuminated the cramped walls, and what the investigators saw made the room feel less like a shelter and more like a confession frozen in dust. On the small desk sat a collection of items arranged with unsettling precision. A cracked, leather-bound journal, the ink on its pages faded to a ghostly gray. 2 war medals tarnished but still recognizable, one an iron cross, the other a knight's cross clasp left to rust. A broken shortwave radio, its wires twisted like veins that had been violently severed. Nazi memorabilia lay scattered in boxes beneath the desk armbands, insignia patches, propaganda pamphlets printed in thick Gothic script. None of it felt like random clutter. This was a life packed away in a hurry, but not without care. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Behind the cot, tucked into a metal hand case sealed with a rubber gasket, investigators found a hidden cache rows of food tins labeled in wartime script, packets of powdered milk, water purification tablets, morphine vials, and military-grade gauze, supplies for months, maybe longer. Whoever lived here planned to survive, but the most chilling items were found last. Inside a canvas pouch beneath the bed, a passport bearing the name Otto Weber, stamped in 1944. 2 identity tags engraved with his service number, and a small notebook filled with coded entries, dense blocks of symbols, numbers, and shorthand scribbles that no one could immediately decipher. It wasn't a diary, it was a cipher, one designed to be read only by someone who already knew the truth. As the forensics team photographed each page, one investigator whispered what everyone was thinking. This wasn't a hideout. It was a command post. The room didn't just hold Weber's past. It held his intentions planned so carefully hidden that it took 80 years and a crumbling wall for them to finally be seen. It didn't take long for analysts to realize Weber hadn't built this sanctuary alone. The journals, letters, and coded messages unearthed from the hidden room made that painfully clear. Scattered among the debris were envelopes with no stamps, no return addresses, sealed in wax and signed with a single initial B. No full name, no identifiers, just that letter. Every message carried the same tone, clinical, direct, and laced with the quiet urgency of someone orchestrating movements from the shadows. One letter referred to the corridor, an apparent escape route leading south into Austria, then deeper into the Alps. Another warned Weber to stay hidden. Movement in the valley. Wait for night. Supplies will come. Another simply read, the window remains open, but not for long. These were not messages from a friend. They were instructions, orders. Historians reviewing the letters quickly noticed parallels with documented ratline operations, the clandestine post-war escape networks used by Nazi officials to flee Europe. South American visas forged by sympathetic clergy, safehouses run by SS remnants, coded correspondence passed through intermediaries who vanished as quickly as they appeared. If the notes found in Königstall were authentic, they implied that Weber hadn't just disappeared, he'd been escorted into obscurity by a professional network built for exactly this purpose. But certain details made this case even stranger. Several pages in Weber's coded notebook referenced people by single letters, H, K, R, and always B. Sometimes they appeared alongside dates and coordinates, other times next to cryptic phrases like transfer complete or weather unfavorable. The handwriting matched Weber's, but the tone felt different, colder, more mechanical, as if he were documenting a system rather than communicating with individuals. Then came the most disturbing clue. In a bundle of letters tied with string, investigators found a page half burned, the edges curled into fragile black petals. On it, in shaky handwriting, was a final message. If the wall is breached, it means the line has failed. Destroy everything. Do not let them find the names. B. The names were never found, and the more the investigators read, the clearer it became. Weber hadn't been a lone fugitive. He'd been part of something larger, something organized, well-funded, and determined to protect him at all costs. And if B had truly been helping him, the question wasn't just who he was. It was whether anyone from Weber's network had survived long enough to make sure his secrets stayed buried. At first glance, it looked like the kind of notebook you'd toss into a junk pile without thinking. Worn leather cover, frayed binding, the corners dog-eared and cracked. But once opened, it became clear this wasn't a personal diary or a ledger. It was something far stranger. Every page was covered in tight, obsessive script, dense with numbers, unfamiliar symbols, shorthand phrases, arrows, strange grids, and what appeared to be astrological diagrams overlapping with coordinates. To the untrained eye, it was nonsense. To the intelligence analysts brought in the next morning, it was a relic from the heart of a war that never truly ended. Within hours, they recognized patterns. The writing wasn't gibberish, it was encrypted. Some entries used a cipher style consistent with those employed by the Abwehr, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service. Others resembled adaptations of Enigma-level code, simplified but still sophisticated enough to slow even modern decryption tools. The deeper they dug, the more troubling the contents became. One decoded segment listed a series of locations, mountain towns, train stations, and old logging routes, each paired with a date and a name marked only by initials. Another appeared to be a timetable, perhaps for supply drops or clandestine meetings. R at 0600, weather permitting. Use Route 3. Avoid signal fires. Several entries mentioned surveillance warnings of patrols, suggestions to avoid churches, inns, and train yards due to high visibility. Then came something more visual, a sketch, hand-drawn and precise, of what analysts believed to be an escape network stretching from southern Germany into the Austrian Alps, with dotted lines trailing as far as Genoa and a faint ink stamp labeled La Linea. That name alone sent shivers through the historians in the room. La Linea had been whispered in post-war intelligence circles as a myth, an elite ratline reserved only for SS officers, key scientists, and high-ranking officials with information too valuable to lose. Whoever had written this notebook had intimate knowledge of a system no one had ever fully proven existed. And if the entries were to be believed, General Otto Weber hadn't just been a passenger on this line, he may have helped operate it. This wasn't just the story of a fugitive. This was a glimpse into the skeletal architecture of a ghost army, one that had no intention of surrendering. The notebook raised questions. The walls answered them. During a secondary search of the farmhouse, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the adjacent cellar, investigators discovered a rolled-up bundle wrapped in oilcloth blueprints. At first, they assumed it was a renovation plan. But the paper was brittle with age, the ink faded in places, and the title block at the top left corner was unmistakably dated August 1944. These were not updates. These were original instructions. The blueprints showed the farmhouse as it once was, but with strange additions. Behind the kitchen wall, now long remodeled, was a false space marked Z1, the hidden room. Its dimensions matched perfectly with what had been discovered. Notes written in tidy German script detailed material requirements: sand-lime bricks, concrete reinforcements, ventilation routing. Everything was planned, calculated, intentional. There was even a notation about thermal insulation meant to mask body heat from any post-war Allied search using dogs or infrared. But it was the second drawing that turned the air cold. A side cutaway of the home revealed a passage leading from the hidden room under the back courtyard and toward the edge of the orchard. It terminated at a hand-dug tunnel marked Z2. According to the measurements, it would have opened near the tree line, well beyond the visibility of any patrol road, an escape route perfectly camouflaged, leading directly into the forest. Investigators went to the site. The earth had shifted over decades, but a depression near the orchard suggested the tunnel had once existed. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed it, a collapsed shaft, now filled with stone and tree root. No one knew if Weber ever used it, but its existence confirmed a chilling truth: this wasn't just a safe room. It was a designed contingency. Someone had anticipated failure, exposure, and pursuit. Someone had built Weber a way out. Speculation grew around who might have drawn up the plans. The property owner at the time had no engineering background, but records from 1943 listed a temporary resident, a man with a background in architecture, discharged from the Wehrmacht under unknown circumstances. His name? Redacted in all surviving documents. Another dead end, or perhaps just another wall waiting to be broken open. Because if Weber had helped building this place, the most important question still hadn't been answered. Who else knew it was here? In Königstal, stories are passed quietly, like secrets folded into the lining of old coats. After the discovery of the hidden room, investigators turned to the village's oldest residents, the few who had lived through the war and the uneasy silence that followed. Their recollections didn't come easily. Not because they couldn't remember, but because some memories are best left undisturbed. One man, now in his late 92s, spoke of the ghost. A figure seen from afar, always alone, always watching. Tall, thin, wore a hat pulled low, walked like a soldier, he said. Another recalled livestock going missing, chickens, a goat, once even a calf, never slaughtered in place, just gone, vanished overnight. Something took them, she whispered, her eyes unfocused. Or someone. Several spoke of strange sounds in the forest during the winters after the war. Footsteps on frozen leaves, shutters closing in houses that no one lived in, candlelight flickering behind broken windows. But no one went to check. No one asked questions. Because in Königstal, questions meant attention. And attention back then was dangerous. The farmhouse in question had always been quiet. No children, no garden. The family who owned it kept to themselves. During the war, they claimed to be hosting a distant cousin recovering from a lung illness. After 1945, they said he had died. There was no funeral, no grave, only silence. The kind of silence you learn not to disturb. One resident remembered his father warning him to stay away from the orchard after sundown. "That road doesn't belong to us anymore," he'd said. "If you see someone in the trees, keep walking. Don't look. Don't wave." Another recalled how, every few weeks, someone would leave parcels outside the old chapel tins, bread, wool blankets, always gone by morning. It was as if the entire village had been held under a spell, not of loyalty, but of fear. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that settles into your bones. They didn't know who was hiding in the hills, but they knew someone was. A ghost, maybe, or a man who had seen too much and wasn't ready to be found. Either way, the message was clear. The war was over, but someone was still occupying Königstal, and no one dared call him by name. The discovery of the Safehouse reignited interest across intelligence communities still haunted by the ghosts of the war they thought they'd closed. Declassified British and American archives were re-examined. Dusty memos pulled from forgotten folders marked Eclipse, Residual Assets. Among them, one stood out. Dated July 18, 1946. Typewritten, slightly smudged, bearing the stamp of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, precursor to the CIA. It read, "Credible leads suggest a high-value target, possibly a general, is being sheltered in the Bavarian region near Königstal. Local civilian cooperation presumed. Recommend quiet observation, not direct engagement." But follow-up reports were conspicuously absent. No surveillance notes, no field photographs, nothing to confirm or deny the presence of Weber. Just a blank space in the files where answers should have been. Intelligence officials at the time had thousands of names to track, hundreds of safe houses to investigate, and a Europe in ruins to sort through. The trail, like so many others, simply vanished under the weight of post-war chaos. One report from British military intelligence mentioned a concealed passage near an orchard on a private estate, but it was dismissed due to lack of evidence. The agent who filed it was later reassigned and died in an unrelated incident. Another OSS document listed Königstal as a dead-end lead, suggesting the source had recanted or disappeared. A footnote added in red pencil, "Resources better used elsewhere." Some believe this wasn't neglect, it was willful blindness. With the Cold War dawning and new enemies rising, old ones were quietly folded into new arrangements. Former Nazis with technical knowledge, engineers, scientists, intelligence officers were absorbed into programs like Operation Paperclip. Files disappeared, names were changed, silence became strategy. Weber, it seemed, had fallen between the cracks on purpose. A ghost given just enough room to vanish. If agents had searched Königstal in 1946, they found nothing, or they found something they were told to forget. Either way, the records stop, the names fade, and General Otto Weber became what the intelligence world quietly dreads most. A high-value target who simply disappeared. Until now. Because 80 years later, the files may be faded, the agents long dead, but the truth never stopped breathing behind that false wall. And the village, that once kept its secrets buried, is finally beginning to speak. 2 weeks after the cipher notebook was decrypted and the architectural blueprints were confirmed authentic, a team from the Bavarian State Office for Monument Protection arrived with ground-penetrating radar. The focus was a patch of land just beyond the orchard, where the collapsed escape tunnel had been detected. At first, the readings came back clean, just roots, rocks, layers of undisturbed soil. But then, 30 meters from the tunnel's suspected exit, the radar lit up with something different. A density anomaly, shallow, roughly 6 feet in length, rectangular, human-shaped. The dig was slow, careful. Layers of moss-covered soil gave way to loose earth that had clearly been disturbed at some point in the past. Less than a meter down, they found it. Bone. A femur, weathered but intact. Nearby, fragments of a skull, ribcage, and spine. A skeleton curled slightly on its side, facing away from the farmhouse. No coffin, no markings, just the soil and the silence. Initial analysis estimated the man had been in his 50s, possibly older. A healed fracture in the left wrist, slight scoliosis. Receding dental health, consistent with long-term stress and limited nutrition. The bones bore no signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no broken ribs, suggesting he hadn't been executed or killed in a struggle. He had simply died. Of illness, starvation, exposure, or time. But it was the facial reconstruction that shifted the investigation from speculation to possibility. Forensic artists used remaining skull fragments, combined with digital modeling and surviving photographs, to rebuild the man's face. The result was unnervingly familiar. The nose, the jawline, the high cheekbones. a near match to the only surviving photograph of General Otto Weber taken in 1944. It wasn't definitive, but it was close enough to shake everyone in the room. DNA testing was the next step. But the final blow came from the archives. During the Battle of Berlin, the Reich Ministry's civilian registry, along with thousands of military personnel records, was obliterated by Allied shelling. Weber's file, and with it his genetic data, was presumed lost in the fire. Without a direct relative, the bones could not be conclusively identified. All they had was a corpse, buried in secret, with a face that looked too familiar to ignore. It might have been him, or it might have been someone else entirely planted to ensure Weber's true trail stayed cold. Either way, someone had buried the past, but the forest and the soil beneath it had refused to keep its silence. The discovery of the skeleton only deepened the mystery. If it was Weber, how had he died? And if it wasn't, then where had he gone? The decrypted notebook and accompanying journal entries found in the hidden room offered a theory more chilling than a grave in the woods. That Otto Weber had never fled Europe at all. That the escape to Argentina, the rumors of a South American sanctuary, had been intentional misdirection, a myth he helped write. The journal entries were revealing not in what they said, but in what they assumed. Weber wrote about the world beyond the war as if he were watching it unfold from a distance, not as someone lost in exile. He referenced the Nuremberg trials by name, mentioning Gehring's suicide, Ribbentrop's execution, and the absurdity of international morality delivered by victors in tailored uniforms. One entry, dated June 1946, described hearing a BBC broadcast from a smuggled radio. They speak of justice while building the next war. Nothing changes. That entry alone changed the timeline. Weber was alive after the war, not in Argentina, not in Syria, but here, in Königstal. The food stockpiles, the radio, the medical supplies, they hadn't been stored for a brief stay. They were the groundwork for a long-term disappearance. Not a man on the run, but a man choosing to vanish, surrounded by people willing to let him. Other details supported this. A weathered copy of Der Spiegel, dated 1951, folded between mattress springs. A receipt from a Stuttgart pharmacist, dated 1949, found behind a loose floor tile, faded ink, but still legible. Whoever he was, he hadn't died in 1945. He'd watched the world rebuild, brick by brick, while remaining hidden in the cracks between its foundations. And the villagers, consciously or not, had kept his secret. Some out of fear, others perhaps out of loyalty. Because by 1950, the post-war tide had shifted. The West was hunting communists, not Nazis. Men like Weber, with military intelligence and engineering expertise, were no longer threats, they were assets. If he had decided to leave Königstal after the early 52nds, he might have walked into a new life with a handshake and a false name. The war had ended. But for Otto Weber, the escape had worked. Not because he vanished, but because the world let him. The final threads unraveled not in the basement, but in the archives. Investigators tracing the farmhouse's ownership history uncovered a transfer deed dated February 1944, just a few months before construction on the hidden room began. The buyer listed was one Jakob Reiner, a name that hadn't surfaced in years. On paper, Reiner was a retired forestry worker. In reality, he had served as a quartermaster in the Waffen-SS, attached to a logistics unit operating in southern Poland until his discharge for medical reasons in late 1943. After the war, Reiner remained in Königstal, quietly reverting to his previous life. No charges, no trials. He died in 1962, buried in the local cemetery beneath a modest stone cross, his military past erased from public record. But there were whispers, and now, finally, proof. The Safehouse wasn't just tolerated, it had been facilitated. Further investigation pointed to a network of local officials who had, knowingly or not, helped obscure Weber's presence. Paperwork went missing, property inspections were skipped, power to the farmhouse was rerouted through a disconnected meter, a trick requiring cooperation from someone inside the utility office. One letter found in the cipher notebook even referenced clearing snow off the orchard road before delivery, signed only with a small, hand-drawn feather. It was a symbol later linked to Reiner's personal stationery, recovered from a private collection. When asked for comment, the grandson of a former mayor agreed to speak reluctantly. "People want to believe we knew everything," he said, "that we were hiding monsters in our barns. But it wasn't like that. Not really." He paused, looking out toward the mountains. "We were just trying to survive. Everyone had their own past. Some you buried, some buried you." It wasn't a dramatic confession. There was no smoking gun, no list of names carved into a cellar wall. Just the steady erosion of doubt. In Königstal, silence hadn't just hidden Weber. It had protected him. And like so many villages across post-war Europe, the decision not to ask questions became a form of collaboration all its own. As the dust settled and the last of the Safehouse evidence was catalogued, the historical community stepped in first with curiosity, then with awe. The Königstal discovery wasn't just another cold case revisited. It was something far rarer, a physical, untouched relic of one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Dr. Claudia Henschel, a senior historian at the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, was among the first to visit the site. "We have documents, we have testimonies, but what we don't have are places like this," she said. "A preserved escape bunker, a genuine, unaltered hiding place for a Nazi general. It's like opening a sealed envelope from the past." The site offered something tangible in a field often riddled with speculation. Historians had long debated the scale of post-war Nazi evasion networks, how many officers slipped away, how many were sheltered by sympathetic civilians, how many never left at all. The Königstal Safehouse was an answer. But it also posed more questions. If Weber had vanished so completely, aided by people who kept his secret for decades, how many others had done the same? How many false walls, unmarked graves, and lost notebooks were still out there, hidden in the cracks of rural Europe, behind barns and beneath floorboards? The discovery also forced a new reckoning with the myth of total Allied justice. For every war criminal brought to trial at Nuremberg, how many vanished under the cloak of Cold War politics and shifting priorities? The farmhouse wasn't just a place of hiding, it was a symptom, a physical representation of what happens when vengeance gives way to convenience and accountability is buried under geopolitics. Academic conferences were already being scheduled. Documentaries were being proposed. The site itself was in the process of being protected under historical preservation laws, with plans to open it intact to the public, not as a shrine, but as a warning. Because Otto Weber's story is no longer just about one man. It's about what the world allowed him to become, what it was willing to forget, and what might still be waiting to be found in the silence between history books. By autumn, the excavation was over. The documents had been removed, the soil tested, the final bones catalogued and stored in the archives beneath Munich. But the room itself, the narrow, dust-choked chamber hidden for nearly 8 decades, was left untouched, not out of neglect, but by design. Königstal had kept its secret for 80 years. Now, it would display it. The Bavarian Ministry of Culture officially designated the farmhouse a protected historical site. Preservationists moved in, cataloging every object down to the placement of the rusted food tins and the tilt of the broken chair. The bed frame remained exactly where it had been found. The journal stayed on the desk, now under glass. Even the flickering remains of old candle wax were left to harden in place, undisturbed. They weren't trying to clean the past, they were trying to preserve it. The false wall was rebuilt. But this time, not with bricks. This time, It was transparent reinforced glass spanning the basement's width, allowing visitors to stand just beyond the threshold and peer into the life of a man who was never supposed to be seen. Spotlights were added sparingly. The lighting was kept dim, cold, quiet. The goal wasn't dramatization, it was revelation. Outside, a modest plaque was installed. It bore no celebration, no condemnation, just facts. The name Otto Weber, rank, last known position, disappeared 1945. Discovered 2025. It offered no judgment, only truth. And just below it, etched into the glass, the final line from the General's Journal. A sentence written in a hand that had not trembled. History is written by those who are found. I intend not to be. For years that line had been buried under stone and silence. Now it faced the world, as much a warning as a confession. Because Weber had almost succeeded. He had nearly become one of history's forgotten men, a shadow in a uniform, erased by time and war. But in the end, it wasn't a military tribunal or a manhunt that exposed him. It was age, decay, a crumbling wall. The room is quiet now. Visitors pass through slowly, in reverent silence, faces reflected in the glass. They stare into the past and see not just one man's escape, but the machinery that made it possible. The system, the silence, the complicity. History didn't find Weber, time did. And now, so has the rest of the world. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.